Hi there, I'm Des.
And I'm Tim, and together Des and I head up the men's ministry Momentum Australia.
Momentum has multiple functions, but primarily our aim is to help men to succeed in life, to do life better.
We run a weekly radio show that goes all around Australia where we talk about anything and everything that relates to men.
And we encourage men to do life in community, to do life with other men where we can be accountable, we can be welcome, we can be open and honest about what's happening in our world.
We'd love you to have a look around our website. That's momentumaustralia.org. There you'll find a bunch of resources to help you on your journey and all of our previous episodes and topics.
We thank you for your interest in Momentum Australia, and we hope you enjoyed this video today.
All right, well, welcome to Momentum. It is the first one for 2023. Des, how exciting is it to be back? It's so good, hey?
I love it. I love doing this. And I hope you had a good Christmas.
Me personally, or everybody listening? Or just
everybody?
In all seriousness, we do. Actually, we hope you had a really awesome Christmas and you've had a great start to 2023. We get a really good feel about this year. I mean, partly for what we're doing here at Momentum Days, but just generically, I think there's a good feel around what's happening around the guys in Australia.
No, I think so too. And it's what's amazing, Tim, is that this is our third year for Momentum, and I just so enjoy what we do, and being a blessing to men is just fantastic. It's such a great blessing.
Massive thank you once again quickly to the radio stations that take this show all around Australia, and of course to you guys for listening faithfully, hopefully every week, and tuning into the podcast as well. We really, really appreciate all of that. MomentumAustralia.org is the website, by the way. If you want to find out a bit more about who we are, why we're here, what we hope to do, etc., etc., check out the website, MomentumAustralia.org. And of course, you can have a look at some of the other material we've got on there too. And just help yourself and avail yourself on the journey, as we know we're all trying to do life better. Hey, Des.
That's right. And don't forget Momentum CARELINE, which is 1-800-000-MEN or 1-800-000-636. You can reach out and get help 7 days a week, 9 a.m. to 11 p.m., 1-800-000-MEN.
Yeah, that's an awesome feature that we've got, and we love that we've got that for you coming into 2023. Avail yourself of that. And Des, as we settle into a brand new year, I've been reminded of something that I heard a few years back, and this is setting the scene for the show that we're about to launch into. So the first one, we've got the formalities out of the way. Now we're going to get down to the serious business, because you know what? It is a new year. But a new year doesn't mean too much unless you do something. So let me get into this. So this is a saying that I heard a few years back. If a new year doesn't come with a new you, then the new year will be last year on repeat. Essentially, if we don't change, what we're going to do is just recycle some of our experiences. So how do we start to implement long-term and lasting change in our lives this coming year?
It's a really good question. And, one of the things, Tim, that we need to do is to sit down and take an inventory of our lives, to be really honest with who we are, where we're at, asking really open, honest questions. It's a chance for us to make the most of our lives. And we really need to be honest with ourselves. And most of us would admit that we can do better in all areas of our life.
It's true, Des. As you said, it's going to require us to be honest, to have a good look at ourselves and our lives, and to be brutally honest about who we are and where we're at. And I heard someone say recently, Des, if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. If it doesn't challenge you, it's not going to change you. So are you ready to be lovingly challenged over the next 25 minutes or so in preparation for this new year? As we were prepping for this, Des, I was reminded of a scripture, and it's 2 Corinthians 13, verse 5. And it's for those men around the country listening right now who have a faith particularly, but the things that we're going to talk about don't necessarily require a faith. So if you're not a faith, just stay tuned. But this is something from the Bible that I thought was really interesting. It says, examine yourselves and see whether you're in the faith. All right. And I mean, that's a pretty confronting scripture. Let's be honest.
And it's so important. It's so important that we know where we stand, in our God world.
Right.
Whether you believe in God or not, God exists. And so it's really important that we know what our standing is. It's so critical.
So if you have a faith, examine yourselves and see whether you're in the faith. Guys, if you're listening right now and you don't have a faith, that's cool. We've got 5 things we're going to explore this week. These are key areas that you can use as a bit of a guide, I suppose, as a litmus test, as a starting point to go, this is where I'm at right now. If I get really honest with myself, is this where I want to be this year? And are there things that I know I can really pull my socks up in this year and improve not only myself, but my life in general. So the 5 key areas real quickly, we're going to look at the backstory. Is that impacting you now? Identity, do you know who you are? Idols, as in things that might have your heart or your attention more than you would like. Your calling, do you know why you're here? And there's something we've talked about before, legacy,
Yeah.
which is something that we tend not to talk about, but we want to talk about legacy because who you are remembered as is really important. And we don't often think about that until it's too late.
Yeah, and all these 5 are absolutely key to how we do life. It affects our relationships. It affects our confidence in ourselves. It affects our relationship with God. It affects what we do. You know, are we focused on work? Are we focused on spiritual things? Are we focused on God's calling on our lives? And all those things are so important, leading to what do we leave behind?
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, well, let's delve into it, Des. Let's get into this. Number 1 is the backstory. And, you know, for me, this was important. And I'll just quickly give my backstory because it was, I think I was about 38 years old. And my life went sideways for the first time. And I realized in that moment that I actually hadn't dealt with the backstory. And the backstory for me was a lot of rejection from mum. And I'd taken that really personally. I had a lot of unresolved anger, didn't like myself very much. And that was affecting the relationships around me. And it was only when I started doing some work after my first marriage fell apart that I realized that I hadn't dealt with a lot of stuff, that even though it was in the past, it was still very present in my life. So the first question for guys listening, Des, is have you ever delved into your backstory?
That's a really good question. And, you know, I look back at my life and I had a very different upbringing than you did, Tim, but, you know, I had great parents and loving parents. But, you know, one little phrase in your life can change everything.
Right.
And one little phrase in my life that I was told repeatedly by my mom and dad was, in fact, I felt it because I was so different from my siblings, was I felt I was adopted.
Oh, interesting.
I truly believed I was adopted. And all my, you know, my formidable years, because, you know, simple things like somebody come into the house and say to my sister, oh, you look very like your dad. And they say to my eldest next brother from me, you know, you look very like your mom. And my youngest brother, they say, oh, you look very like your dad. And they look at me and say, you're like nobody.
But did your parents actually say to you that you were, did they joke with you and say that, oh, you must be adopted? Like,
Yeah.
were they joking when they said that?
Yeah, of course they were. But, you know, for a little fellow who's maybe 9 or 10,
Sure.
I took it to heart.
Oh,
And,
right.
and I never actually raised it. I kept it as part of my backstory. And that's what we're talking about until I was actually coming to Australia from Ireland. And I sat down with my mum and dad and I said, you know, all my life, I was 27 and said, all my life, I believed I was adopted.
Wow.
And my mum said, if you knew what I went through giving birth to you, you would know you're not adopted.
But isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, we laugh at that and it is a funny story, but you thought that there was truth in that.
Yeah.
For almost 20 years, you thought there was truth in that. And that then affected not only how you related to your parents, but what you thought about yourself. Right.
Yeah, totally.
And this is the thing. You know, so I'm big on Psalm 139. We'll get into this in a moment when it talks to identity. But, you know, who is it that you've been called to be?
Yeah.
And, you know, often we can inherit things generationally from our family, right? So let's be honest, each of our families has ways of doing things. And we don't ever question that when we're a kid because it's mom and dad and we respect what they're bringing to our lives. And we kind of go, well, this is the way that this family operates.
Yeah.
And yet at some stage, we've got a choice to make, particularly when we get as adults and generally when we get married and have our own families to go, is this the way that I still want to do that?
Yes.
Was that actually healthy? Or was I just repeating something because it was what the family did, even though actually it was really dysfunctional and unhealthy? And for a lot of us, until we stop and think about that stuff, Des, we'll generally just these family traditions or the generational traits that we inherit just naturally as people. Oh, well, that's the way I am. My mum was exactly the same. I'm like, okay, but you're not your mum and I'm not my dad.
And
you know what I mean?
I do know exactly what you mean. And you're right. It goes deeper than that, doesn't it, Tim? I mean, it goes to things that, you know, that are generational in terms of all sorts of cults or whatever it happens to be. Like, for example, you know, the Freemasonry is huge. And so, you know, kids are drawn into Freemasonry because their fathers or their grandfathers or great-grandfathers or generations were in the Freemasons. And, in the case of Northern Ireland, obviously there was the Orange Order, which was a Protestant sort of secret closed organization, similar in many ways to the Freemasons. But there's lots of things like shame and pride and that are drawn into our backstory.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. So a couple of questions then that we can stop and think about when we ask ourselves about the backstory. Have I ever really stopped and thought about my upbringing? Were there key moments in my upbringing that might have shaped me? Whether there were things that were good or bad that have happened along the way. I mean, some of us have had accidents. We've had things happen in our family that really shaped the dynamic of the family. Were there key moments that, for me personally, that even maybe my parents didn't know about, that might have happened for me at school, on the schoolyard? I was teased, maybe I had a horrific time at school, but I never told my parents, and I've carried that for a long time. I suppose essentially the big question, Des, is any area of my past, regardless of how old I am, still affecting my present?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
if it is, it needs to be dealt with.
Yeah. But what do you think it means to deal with it? What do you think that actually means? How do we deal with that stuff?
I think it depends on what it is, Des. I think if there's something that you can see, well, for me, okay, let's use me as an example with my mum, for example. So the rejection that I felt from my mum, I carried that into every relationship that I had. So I kept people at arm's length because I didn't want to get rejected. And even after I'd started doing the work with a counselor of going back into the backstory and dealing with where that was coming from and why, I'll give you an example. Like, I think it was like three or 4 years ago. So I was on the journey at this stage, but I remember going into one of the supermarkets, right? And this is when they just brought out their own bags that you could buy. So they'd scrap the plastic bags and you had to buy one of their own bags. And I didn't know the process. So I start loading this bag up, and this lady comes to me, and she was an older lady, and she starts going, no, 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 you can't do that. Did you scan the bag? Did you scan that? And I said, oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. And so she was, oh, you've got to scan the bag. And I was a little agitated, but I held it together. And then I went, oh, okay. And then I walked out afterwards and I went, okay, why did I respond that way to her? Now, part of it was that I just didn't know the process. I felt a bit silly. But part of it was that in that moment, I felt like she was my mother telling me off.
Wow. Wow. And,
Right?
all of us will have things like that, little small incidents where it really does affect us, and we need to deal with those issues, as you rightly
Right.
said.
So dealing, Des, I think the first thing is to sit and go, get aware, right? Get aware of what's happening for me in moments. When I look at how I respond and how I react, are there things that seem to crop up in a regular basis in my life, or ways that I respond, whether it be in certain situations or to certain people specifically? And if that's recurring, and it's not necessarily a healthy response or a reaction, then why is that, right? Because generally, if it's an overreaction, it's being triggered from something that's unresolved.
No, it's absolutely right. And we encourage men, anybody who's listening, in fact, but men in particular, because that's our focus, to really self-examine. Just sit down for an hour and a half. Just sit down and think about the levers, all the things that is impacting you in your world. And you'd be surprised at the number of things in your childhood, and if you're honest with yourself, the number of things that you will discover that you need to talk about or deal with in your own world. And that's the whole key to the backstory.
Can I just say as a disclaimer, when you start doing this, there's probably going to be so much stuff comes up, honestly, that it can be overwhelming, right? And you can go, I'm an absolute basket case, right? Because I have been there. When I started unpacking the scab at 38, it was overwhelming for me. But it's just about taking it one thing at a time, one moment at a time, one day at a time, and just acknowledging certain things in your life and going, okay, I've got an awareness piece now. This is not going to get fixed overnight. And
Yeah.
for me, it was 38 years of programming that I needed to undo and then start reprogramming. That is not going to happen in 24 hours.
No,
Right?
exactly right.
But it's the awareness piece to go, okay, when I respond like that, what's happening for me? And can I change that the next time that happens? One of the things that a good friend of mine says is what we don't repair, we repeat.
Yeah.
What we don't repair, we repeat. In other words, whatever's happened in our family line that's happened either around us or to us, if we don't repair that at some stage, we are going to repeat that either in our own lives or then as parents, if we have kids, we'll just do the same thing. And the kids will be the generational effect of then what we don't repair.
That is so, so true. It just gets passed down. It's so true. But the other word of encouragement for guys is you're not the only one who's got a backstory. We all have a backstory. We all have issues, and we all have long lists that we need to deal with. So please, if you write down a whole list and that frightens you, just please understand you're same as everybody else. We all have them. Some are different, but that we all have them.
One of the key things in momentum that we talk about is getting connected with other guys, but also getting honest and vulnerable about who you are and where you're at. And that, let's be honest, for a lot of us, that's a journey. And we need safe, trusted spaces before we step into that space as men, because we don't step into that space easily. And we just want to acknowledge that, right? That some of you listening right now, you're on the journey. You've realized that, there's real benefit in opening up about your life. Some of you might still feel a bit hesitant about that, and that's totally understandable. But I preface that by saying, because where we're going with the 5 steps to starting the year well, it does require, whether it's with somebody else or certainly with yourself, a degree of honesty and vulnerability there.
Yes, totally. There's no point otherwise. Unless you can be honest with yourself, you're not going to be honest with anybody else.
Yeah.
And so that's absolutely key, that we are prepared to open the doors of us.
Yes.
And much better that you have somebody you can confide in, somebody you trust, somebody who you've got a relationship with, another bloke, and get alongside them and say, hey, can I just open my heart to you? I just want to talk about where I am. And please feel free to sow into my world.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to the beginning of the show. And this was a quote that I heard from Pastor Mark Varghese at Kingdom City Church. And this was back in 2012. And he said, if a new year doesn't come with a new you, then the new year will be last year on repeat. And so, great, we've got 2023. Everyone comes into the year. It's a new year, new expectations. But the truth is, unless we do some inner work with ourselves, sit and look at ourselves and go, hey, I could pull my socks up in these areas, and actually then do some work about that. Some of what we're going to do in 2023 is just the same old habits, the same old repetitions, because we need to actually do some work on ourselves. So the 5 key things we're looking at over the next couple of shows, we looked at the backstory, the stuff in the backstory that perhaps is undealt with, some of your upbringing, some of how your parents treated you, how life treated you, certain things that may have happened to you as a kid that might still be affecting who you are today. That's the first part. The second part we want to talk about nowadays, I love this because I'm big on this, right? Identity. Who am I?
Yes.
Who am I?
What makes me who I am today?
Right. When I strip away my past, what my parents said about me, what my teacher said about me, what my friends at school said about me and perhaps riddled me in the schoolyard with, what my work colleagues may say about me, who the world tells me who I should be, and social media tells me that this is what success looks like and this is what a man looks like. When I break all of that stuff off, who am I?
Yeah, it's fundamental, right? And let me give you an example. Whenever I left the corporate world, and I was very successful in the corporate world, but when I left the corporate world, I'll give you a real example. I could have been out to dinner every night of the week with suppliers. I would be invited to the cricket. I'd be invited to all those things. And so it made me feel good. It really became part of my identity. The moment I left the corporate world, I didn't get one phone call, not one invite to dinner, or anything else, and that was devastating for me. Yes. Because my identity was in what I did; it wasn't on who I was.
But essentially, that told you that they were only interested in you in that moment because
Correct.
of who you were to
the
them,
role
not
I
because
played.
of who you actually are.
Yes. It was all about the role I played. And you're,
Right.
and you're right. If you take away our wives and our kids and our job and our house and our bank account and our investments, who am I? Who am I?
Yeah.
What is your value? Where's your value based? Yeah.
See, often as men, and we've talked about this before, and this is well kind of documented, but often as men, we do find identity and our self-worth in what we do.
Yeah.
And, guys listening, when you ever go to a men's group or you've been to, they go, hey, who are you? And what do you do for a living? I mean, that's what we do, right? But if our identity is in anything external, as in a job, I'm a husband and I have kids and whatever, and that's fine. But if it's anything external outside of that and it's subject to change, then we're on slippery ground, right?
Yes, exactly right. And it can be something very close. I mean, how many people during the year have lost their partners or lost, in tragic circumstances?
Yeah.
And if their identity was in that person, what is their identity now?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to bring in another scripture today, Psalm 139, verse 13 and 16. And it says, for you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. Verse 15, my frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. Your eyes saw my unformed body, all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. So the Bible talks about this fact that we're known before we even are.
Yeah.
And that blows my mind.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if you're a person of faith, it's probably blown your mind at some stage. And if you're not a person of faith, it probably won't make any sense whatsoever. And I get that. But the truth is, our encouragement to you is, when you were being created, right, there was an expectation, rightly or wrongly, from your parents and from life about who, this. I mean, when a little baby comes out, and Des and I now have grandkids, it's like we don't put parameters and negative things on this. We encourage them to be all that they want to be.
Yes. Yes.
Right. It's like, oh, there's so much potential in this little child. And yet for some reason along the way, sometimes that can get forgotten about, snuffed out. The world comes in and tells us, no, you can't do that. You got to do this and, whatever. And
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm really passionate about guys, particularly stepping up and going, like, when I break off all of those things that I've believed about myself, rightly or wrongly, over the years, who is it that I'm actually meant to be?
Yes.
Because when I find that person, then I'm my truest version of myself.
That's absolutely right. And I was just going to say a very similar thing, in that God gives us an identity before we even existed, because he knew who we were going to be. Right. And he created that identity. And all of a sudden we are born and we come into the world. And then that identity is sort of set in the background, and we create a new identity based on things around us, our backstory, or who we think we are, and our identity. But that identity is still there.
Yes.
And that's what we need to find, and that is found, as we know, in our relationship with Christ. Yeah.
So a couple of other questions just to leave you with as we wrap up the show for this particular show. We're going to come back and explore the other bits in the next week. But do I understand my identity and authority as a believer, but also as a man? Right. So if you're a man and you're married and you're a Christian, then you understand you have a spiritual authority in your house. And most importantly, do I understand that? But am I applying it appropriately?
Yes, it's very important that we get that right, because it doesn't mean you're the boss, and it doesn't mean that you can, tell your wife what to do or your partner what to do. But what it means is that you, in a loving, caring, thoughtful relationship way, you have a responsibility.
Yes,
it's a responsibility rather than anything else.
Yes,
to your family and your kids.
And can I paraphrase it in a simple way and put it this way? Are you fighting for your family or with your family?
Yes, good.
Right? Because a lot of us as men, when we don't understand that properly, and the roles aren't clearly identified with our husband and wife, sometimes we can jostle for that position, and we can fight with our family instead of for our family.
And also alongside that is, in terms of our identities, what are you speaking over yourself? What do you tell yourself when you wake up in the morning? Is it a positive message? Am I saying things that are truth, or am I sort of making a make-believe world, for the want of a better word?
Right. Well, even on the flip side of that, Des, and a lot of it, and this is something I've had to really deal with and still have to catch myself with every single day. What do I say to myself in my head?
Yeah.
because a lot of us are really good at beating ourselves up in our head,
Yeah.
right? And we will talk to ourselves really poorly. And I've heard someone say, if we talked to other people the way we talk to ourselves in our head, we wouldn't have any friends.
That's really cool. I like that.
And we joke about that, but it's true. Some of us,
Yeah, it
like
is
our
true.
default
Absolutely
position
true.
is when we make a mistake or whatever, oh, you idiot, and we go on this thing and we beat ourselves up in our heads. So what are we saying to ourselves? What do we say about ourselves? And just quickly, and this will set us up for next week, Des, what are we reading? What are we
Yeah.
listening? And what are we watching? What are we
Yes.
ingesting through our eyes, our ears? What are we hearing and what are we seeing? Because all of this stuff that we take in, and we are bombarded every single day.
Yeah.
What are we actually allowing ourselves to read, to listen, and to believe, which is forming who we think about ourselves?
It's interesting, just briefly, one of the things that I was told and sort of took on board when I first became a Christian 11 years ago was, I have the Holy Spirit in me. And so the Holy Spirit sees what I see, hears what I hear, and hears what I say. And if we keep that in mind, it sort of has an impact on how we
Wow.
do life.
You are not alone. Even when you're alone, you're not
Yeah,
alone.
that's right.
That's true. It's so
Amen.
true.
It's great. Yeah.
Hey, there's been a lot in this show already. Hopefully you've got some stuff out of that and it hasn't overwhelmed you as we said as we launch into the first show of the year. 5 keys to starting the year well. We've touched on the first 2, the backstory and identity. What we're watching is important, and that's probably going to kick off next week's show, giving you a quick heads up, which is number 3, which is idols and some of the things that might have crept in that we're watching. And you can read into that. We'll get into that next week. But in the meantime, we're going to point you to the website, momentumaustralia.org. Check out the website, have a look around. And of course, the Momentum CARELINE days. If people need a chat this week, the CARELINE number is
1-800-000-MEN, which is 1-800-000-636.
Remember, you don't need to do life in isolation. There is somebody that you can talk to in confidence on the Momentum CARELINE, 1-800-000-636. Well, that's it for this week's show. We're going to come back and look at the last 3 keys to starting the year well next week. Look forward to your company then. Until then, you take care. God bless.
Thank you for watching this week's show, and we hope you subscribe to Momentum so you can find out what's happening in the shows in the future.
Absolutely. And keep an eye on our website too. That's momentumaustralia.org. There you'll find all of our shows and a whole heap of resources to help you on your journey. That is momentumaustralia.org.
Until next time, keep moving forward
with Momentum.